Good morning, everyone. I'm Kori Blankenship, coordinator for the Northern Rockies Fire Science Network. And on behalf of our team and our partners, I want to welcome you to today's webinar. It's Do-It-Yourself Tinkering, Landfire Data Modification for the Northern Rockies. Your presenter is Kori Blankenship, fire ecologist with the Nature Conservancy. Before introducing our presenter, I was going to run through just a couple of webinar housekeeping items. You are in listen-only mode for the webinar. You can ask questions of me or our presenter by typing them into the questions pane of the control panel. But because this is a small group, we're thinking that at the end of this webinar, we may open up discussion for all attendees. But that doesn't mean you can't type in questions to remember to just be sure that we get to those. But this is the type of webinar that discussion will be encouraged, and there's a large staff available to answer your questions. So we will just wing that at the end. Also, whatever you do in the control panel doesn't affect the presentation, so you can type test messages or test your audio at any time, although your chat messages will be seen by everyone. Also, we're recording this webinar. It will be available on the Northern Rockies Fire Science Network website and YouTube channel soon after the live webinar is concluded. So with that, I'll move on to introducing our presenter, Kori Blankenship. Kori began her fire career working as a forestry tech and wildland firefighter on the Wenatchee. In 2004, Kori joined the LANDFIRE National Program as a GIS specialist. As part of the LANDFIRE team, she has facilitated the creation of thousands of vegetation dynamic models for ecosystems across the U.S. Her current focus, however, is on the application of LANDFIRE products to land management challenges through data customization, user support, and outreach. And this webinar is part of just that. Welcome, Kori. Thank you for being here today, and welcome attendees.
All right. Thanks, Kori. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on your time zone. Let's just see if I can get these. There we go. Okay. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to be here today. You'll see on this slide that I've changed my title just slightly. When we planned this webinar about a month ago, we weren't quite sure what we should focus on. We wanted to do something with data modification, but we weren't quite sure. And since then, I've narrowed it down to really focusing in on fuels data modification. A lot of the same principles really apply to any type of data modification you're doing, but today we'll have a special focus on fuels. Also, as Kori Blankenship alluded to, I have some other members of the LANDFIRE team here today, Tobin Smale and Charlie Martin and Jim Napoli from the LANDFIRE Fuels Mapping team are here. And at the end of the presentation, if you have any technical questions about the fuels products or the LANDFIRE Total Fuels Change tool, they'll be here to help me answer those. My presentation today is actually relatively short, so we should have plenty of time for the Q&A and discussion at the end. Okay, this is what our agenda looks like. First, I'm going to cover just a little bit of background information. I'm assuming that most of you probably know quite a bit about the LANDFIRE program. If you don't, there's lots of information online. My goal with this background section is to give you some perspective on national level data, and in particular, LANDFIRE's national level data sets. Then we'll talk about the reasons to modify spatial data and the special cases of modification that go along when you're looking at fuels data. Then we'll talk about an example from Idaho, and this will be really the main part of the presentation today, is a real-world example where myself and some others modified the fire behavior fuel modeling data layers in South Central Idaho. And then we'll wrap it up with some information about the tools and resources that are helpful in doing this kind of review and modification work. So that's where we're headed. The Landfire program is a shared program between the Department of Interior and the USDA Forest Service. Most of the mapping now happens out of the USGS Data Center in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. The Nature Conservancy's Landfire team is a partner on the project, and you can see our picture there on the right. We're in charge of education and outreach for the program. Landfire produces more than 20 products, mostly geospatial data products, but there are a few non-spatially explicit products in the mix there as well. All of the spatial data are 30-meter rasters, and they're all available for free online.
Excuse me, Kori.
Yeah.
Are you sharing your screen?
Oh.
I was just going to
We're
ask
not
that
seeing
too.
your slides. I think you need to either move it over to the other screen or...
I only have one. Are you on
There you go.
Okay, interesting.
We're good.
Okay, so sorry about that. Thank you. Okay, so those are the Landfire products. There's too many to read anyways, but the idea is that there are a lot. It's a very rich and deep set of data products. Oh, see, now it doesn't want to advance. Let's try this. Okay, now do you see the next one? It's a big map.
Okay. Yes, it's good.
Thank you. Okay. All right, so now just a little perspective on Landfire data. Landfire's hallmark, one of its hallmarks, is that it produces wall-to-wall data sets. And so we have information for the entire United States, and now we even include the island territories, and that's regardless of ownership. So that's a beautiful thing for someone who needs consistent and comprehensive data across the US. However, you can't map the nation under the Landfire production schedule and budget as you can, as well as you could map a smaller area, say a national park. So we work at a pretty breakneck pace to map this entire area, and it works pretty well across the broad scale, but sometimes you'll find problems as you zoom in at finer scales. Another hallmark of Landfire's product suite is that it's all produced with a consistent methodology. So we use approximately the same mapping methods no matter where we're at in the country. And this is very powerful because that allows us to compare really different areas of the country. So you can compare, say, Montana to Hawaii, and now even Guam or some of the other island territories. But that consistency does come with a bit of a cost. We sometimes can't take advantage of better local data sets because we want to create a consistent product. A good example of that is in the past we haven't used LiDAR data. We could probably do a better job of mapping vegetation height with LiDAR data than with the Landsat imagery that we use. But in the past we haven't done that because LiDAR data isn't available everywhere. That actually might change in our next remap, but it's just one example of how we value that consistency, but there are some compromises involved with making a consistent product. Landfire data are designed with a purpose. Landfire was chartered to support national level fire prioritization and resource allocation. This gives our data sets a unified purpose and all the layers combined together to achieve that goal. That's a really beautiful thing for anyone who's used to working with data, and for those of you who work with fuels data, which is our focus today, you're used to working with that landscape file that combines different layers of information, and you want all of that to work together. And you need that to do certain types of analyses. So again, very powerful, but Landfire can't be all things to all people. When push comes to shove, usually the fire issues are going to take precedence when there are conflicts. Landfire data are also updated and improved over time. We've been on a biennial update cycle, delivering new data sets about every 2 years, and we're about to embark on a total remap, which will be delivered sometime in the next probably 3 years. It's very expensive to keep data up to date, so it's nice to have a national level program like Landfire doing this. We learn more every time we map, and we try to make improvements and incorporate new techniques over time. For example, in the first round of LANDFIRE mapping, we came out with a height and cover product and got some feedback that it really wasn't working very well in certain areas, and in particular, it wasn't producing the kind of fire behavior that was anticipated. And so we went back, developed a new methodology, and redelivered that product. So we are trying to make improvements over time. But again, we are always working under a certain production schedule, and we don't always have time to incorporate all the improvements that we would like to. So to sum it up here, LANDFIRE is really good at some things, in particular the national and regional level planning and prioritization that it was designed to support, but it might not always work at finer scales. So there's the problem that we're looking at when we're talking about modifying and adjusting data. There's this great need for consistent, current, cross-boundary data sets, but the available data aren't always going to meet your needs. And if it doesn't, you'll want to take a look at modifying it. There are a lot of reasons to modify data, and I've just listed kind of a few general ones that cover most, kind of form an umbrella over most of the reasons you would want to modify data. One is that there are often issues of scale, and those can be either problems with accuracy or problems with resolution. So you could adjust the data to deal with issues of scale. You might also want to update the landscape for change. Of course, things are changing all the time due to either human disturbances like thinning or development, or natural disturbances like fire or hurricanes. And you also may want to calibrate data. Sometimes data aren't necessarily wrong, but there could be maybe a better answer out there, a better choice. And so you could calibrate it for your local area or for your particular application. Now, there are a few special reasons for modifying fuel data. You might want to modify your fuel data in wet years versus dry years. When you have a very wet year, you could get a real thick herbaceous layer, perhaps a lot of annual grasses, and those kind of things are going to change your fuel load and perhaps your fuel model. So you might make wet versus dry year adjustments. You also might want to make some seasonal adjustments. You could use different fuel models depending on whether you're in a prescribed fire situation in the spring or fall versus your summer wildfire situation. If you're working in an area with deciduous trees, you might need to make some leaf on versus leaf off adjustments. There are also reasons to modify data to help you do comparative analyses. So you might modify your fuels for a pre-treatment versus a post-treatment situation, and then you could run fire behavior fuel models and determine how that changes based on the pre and post-treatment fuel model selection. You could also look at treatment alternatives and create alternative fuel scenarios based on alternative treatments. So I want to give a little bit of information on how LANDFIRE maps the fire behavior fuel models, because this really helps understand how you modify these data and how you review them. LANDFIRE maps the fuel models using a rule-based approach. And the way the rules are developed is by looking for combinations of existing vegetation type, cover, and height, and sometimes the biophysical setting. And you combine those things together and you look at the combinations, and there are rule sets that say what fire behavior fuel model that creates. Now, fuel disturbance is also in here because when we do updates, when we're looking at what's changed over time, we need to know about where there have been disturbances or events or activities like fire or thinning or logging, and that influences the selection of the fire behavior fuel model. So the rule sets that tell you how these things combine together to create certain fuel models were created by fuels and fire specialists around the country through a series of fuel calibration workshops. So we got together, a lot of different folks around the country, and they told us what combinations of these variables create certain fire behavior fuel models. So for example, in a pinyon juniper system, you might have a rule that says if the existing vegetation type is pinyon juniper and the vegetation cover is less than 30%, and it could be any height, we're going to call that a GR1 fuel model. But if it's pinyon juniper and the cover is greater than 60%, any height, we're going to call that a timber litter 1 model. So that gives you kind of an idea of how these rule sets are created. And you can imagine across the entire nation, there are quite a few of these rule sets. And this is what the fire behavior fuel model map looks like. We map both the standard Scottenbergen 40 models as well as the original 13. The other important thing to know about the fuel model mapping rule sets is that they were created for individual zones or groups of zones. So for example, a widespread vegetation type like the pinyon juniper, which covers really large areas of the West, can have a different fuel model assigned to it in a different geography. So if your analysis covers more than one zone, one of the things you need to be aware of is that the same vegetation type can have a different set of rules in these different zones. Here's an example of how that can play out. This is an area in northern New Mexico. You're seeing a map of existing vegetation type in the top left, the fuel model in the top right, and then the fuel model rules down below. So what you see here is to the north, you have in zone 28, the Colorado Plateau pinyon juniper woodland. In zone 25, you have the southern Rocky Mountain pinyon juniper woodland. So that's how the vegetation types are mapped out, and you can see on the right side how that plays out in the fuel models. Those different existing vegetation types were assigned different fuel models, and that may work really well at the broad scale at the level of the entire map zone, and that's how the rules were created. But if you are working in this area, you really have to take a close look at really how different is the pinyon juniper vegetation on either side of this map zone line. And if it's not very different and you think the fuel model should be the same, you could modify it. In some cases, these map zone boundaries do really represent ecological differences on the landscape, so it can represent real differences, and you may really want to reflect that in your fuel models, but they're not always connected with ecological boundaries. And so in some cases they're somewhat arbitrary, and when you're working at those boundaries, you really need to take a close look at how the rules play out. The LANDFIRE Total Fuel Change Tool is a tool developed by the LANDFIRE Fuels team to help them map the fire behavior fuel models, and it's also a great tool that's available for free online for LANDFIRE users to interact with the fuels mapping rules. It's an ArcMap add-in, so you can use it if you have ArcMap. It contains all of the fuels rules for the entire country. It gives you a really nice interface for editing those rules. It has some features that allow you to easily compare between fuel models, and it creates new fuels layers based on any changes you make. So it's a great tool, and it was used in this South Idaho example that I'm going to share in just a few slides here, actually right now. Okay, so we'll jump into this example. This is some work from South Central Idaho. On the map here, you're seeing the South Central Idaho Fire Planning Unit. And this was some work that I did a couple of years ago with Tony Bouchane. Tony Bouchane was a wildland firefighter and GIS analyst working on the Sawtooth at the time. And he was tasked with updating the LANDFIRE fuels data sets. As we mentioned earlier, LANDFIRE updates its data every 2 years, but there's typically this 2 to 3 year lag before you get your new data. So in this particular case, what happened was the Sawtooth had 4 large fires burn in 2013. Now at the time that Tony and I began this project together, I think it was the winter of 2015, the current LANDFIRE data was LANDFIRE 2012. So it's a circa 2012 data set. It didn't include any of the 4 fires that you see here in red on this map that burned in 2013. Well, they could have just waited until this year to get an updated data set. It would have been the LANDFIRE 2014 product, and that would have included these fires. But they didn't want to wait that long, so they decided to go ahead and do an update before that for their entire fire planning unit. Along the way, they decided to calibrate the rule sets and adjust some of the fuel model assignments. So this is the fire planning unit shown with the black outline, and then the different colors represent those different map zones. And I put that on here to show you that there are 3 different map zones that intersect this area where they were working. And when they reviewed the data, they found a couple of issues that they wanted to address. One was that on the southern end of the Sawtooth, so this is the south end of the fire planning unit, you can see that zones 17 and 18 come together. And they felt like there was a real difference in the way LANDFIRE had assigned fire behavior fuel models between those 2 zones, but in reality, the fuels weren't that different. So they wanted to make some changes down there so that you didn't really see the impact of that map zone boundary and the difference in fuel models on either side. Another issue they found was that the fuel rules for zone 17 at the very south end again of the unit, they felt like there was too much dense shrub, SH7, that particular fuel model, assigned, when in reality they felt like it was sort of this juniper savanna, and really the primary carrier of the fire would be the sage-grouse understory. So they wanted to change the fuel model assignment in that area. And then the other area that they highlighted for change was near the zone 10 and 18 boundary. Basically, they felt like there was sort of an over-assignment of shrub fuel models, and they felt like grass shrub models would be a better, give a better representation of the fire behavior that they would expect in those particular vegetation types. So they had a handful of adjustments that they wanted to do in addition to updating for these recent fires. So this is the process they used, or we used. First, they needed to obtain the required data sets. So there is the data required to assign fire behavior fuel models using the LANDFIRE total fuel change tool. And then we also needed data about the fire location and severity. And you can get it either from Modeling Trends in Burn Severity or the Ravage project. Either of those would work. We chose to use MTBS because when we looked at both the Ravage and the MTBS data, you can see that there were some problems with scan lines in the Ravage data. And this is just something that happened with the imagery at that time. And because of that, we said, all right, well, we'll use the MTBS data. That way we don't have to take additional steps to deal with these scan lines. Okay, so once we had the data, our first step was to do something called updating the fuel disturbance grid. In particular, there's something called time sense disturbance that needed to be updated. We'll step through what that means. This map shows LANDFIRE's fuel disturbance grid for 2012. So the fuel disturbance grid is a compilation of all the disturbances we have information about across the country. It shows where they occurred and what type they were, as well as some other information that we'll get to here in just a second. So you can see the primary disturbances in this area were really fires, quite a few fires. And then I have those orange polygons showing the 2013 fires, which of course aren't represented in this data set. Now, when you get into the fuels data, You see that there's information in the attribute table about the type of disturbance, the severity of that disturbance, whether it was low, moderate, or high severity, and then the time since disturbance. Was the disturbance less than a year ago, 2 to 5 years, 6 to 10 years, etc. Those are the pieces of information we need to assign a fuel model when there's been a change on the landscape. So we had to shift this time since disturbance information. We were working in 2015. Well, what we wanted, our ultimate goal was a 2015 data set, but we were working with LANDFIRE 2012 data. So this table just shows you how we had to shift the time since disturbance grid to make sure that 2015 represented time step 1, and 2014, 2013, etc. That's in the 2 to 5 year time step. So this was just a GIS step that we did to get the right time since disturbance to create basically a 2015 time since disturbance attribute instead of what was a 2012 attribute. So when you perform the update to actually stamp in your new disturbances, you take your 2012 disturbance layer that's shown on the left. You can see there's an I just clipped out one little area. So you can see there's an existing fire polygon in gray, and the red outline is the new fire that we wanted to add. We stamped that in using the burn severity information, and that gives you your updated disturbance information. So now we've got the fires that existed in the LANDFIRE 2012 dataset, as well as our new 2013 fires. Then the next step, once you have your fuels disturbance grid updated, is to update the cover information. Ravage data has a canopy cover reduction grid that you can just feed right into this process. We didn't use Ravage because of those scan lines, so we had one extra processing step for MTBS, and we created this, essentially the equivalent of the Ravage canopy cover reduction grid using a formula that we got from the Remote Sensing and Applications Center. All this is documented in a tutorial that I'm going to show you later, so you don't have to remember the details. And we applied that to the 2012 data set, and that's you can see what that looks like here. So the 2012 data set shown on the left has greens representing forest cover. The darker the green, the higher the cover. And then when you see the updated cover on the right, you see a shift essentially to these light greens. So you're getting less canopy cover as a result of the canopy cover reduction. What you would expect from a fire, basically. So that just kind of was a visual verification that our canopy cover reduction was working as we expected it to. Okay, so once we had the updated cover and the fuel disturbance information, we had all the information we needed to update the fuels data in the LANDFIRE Total Fuel Change Tool. So we had our updated cover and our updated fuel disturbance. You'll notice that we didn't update existing vegetation height. We didn't have any information on how that changed after the fires, so we weren't able to make any changes there. We used our updated data as well as the other LANDFIRE layers in the Total Fuel Change Tool. So you direct the tool to where your data exist on your hard drive, and then you go through a series of steps to import the fuel rules and edit them. All of this is very well documented in a guide, and I'll be sharing the link to this guide as well as some other resources at the end. They're long URLs, so I didn't want to put them in the middle of the presentation here. So you kind of get a sense here for how these fuel models are assigned. In this particular case, you've got a mountain basin, montane sagebrush steppe, existing vegetation type. There are a range of covers listed here. In this case, height does not matter. It's 0 to max, so that's any height would do. There's no additional assignment based on biophysical setting, no wild card, which is just an additional variable you can use to create a fuel model assignment. And then you see how the fuel model changes in this case based on the percent cover. And then it's very easy in this interface to make any adjustments that you want. So after we imported all of our information, we made edits to calibrate those areas that they had identified earlier when they reviewed the data where they wanted to change grass shrub basically to, dense shrub models to grass shrub models. They made those changes here and then used the tool itself to produce a brand new set of fire behavior fuel models and all the associated canopy fuel layers. Here's a little look at what changed. This is just zoomed into one of the wildfires. So this represents an area where we updated the data. We weren't changing the rules necessarily, but we just wanted the impact of the post-fire condition to be represented in the fuels data. In this particular map, the greens and blues represent forest fuel models. Peach, that kind of peachy color, is grass shrub models. The yellows are just the grass fire behavior fuel models. So you can see from left to right, there's a shift from grass shrub to grass fuel models as a result of the wildfire. Now, let's take a look at some of the changes that resulted from the calibration work where they actually got in and edited the rules. So I'm going to draw your attention to just a couple of areas here. On the left, you're seeing the original LANDFIRE 2012 data set. On the right is the updated circa 2015 data set that we created. So on the left, before, in this particular area circled in blue, you'll see that there are some shrub fuel models. I grouped up the fuel models, by the way, as you'll see in the legend, because there were it's just confusing to see when you have too many colors on the screen. So that light sort of brownish taupe color, shrub fuel models, you'll see that you don't see that on the right in the updated map because they changed that area to a grass shrub model. And then down here at the southern end of the fire planning unit, again, you see that shift from shrub to grass shrub fuel models. Now, since they created this updated fuel model, set of fuel model layers and the associated canopy fuel layers, they've had a chance to use the data. During the 2015 Great Fire, they used the updated fuels data as the basis for landscape rule changes in the Wildland Fire Decision Support System. They were able, when the long-term analyst came in, they were just able to hand him the adjusted set of fuel models, and that really helped him calibrate and dial in a near-term fire spread and an FS Pro run in the Wildland Fire Decision Support System. They've also used the updated fuels data to develop a BLM statewide fire management plan. And then when they created this new data set, they shared the rule sets with nearby BLM units to help them jumpstart their own fuel calibration effort. So they've been fairly useful. Of course, now LANDFIRE has its new data out, but I think they're pretty happy with what they've created, this circa 2015 data set, and it should last them probably a few more years, barring any other major disturbances in the area. As I mentioned, this process that we used for updating the fuels data in the South Central Idaho Fire Planning Unit is all documented in this tutorial, which we have online. Again, I'll share the links at the end. And again, I just want to recognize that really this is the work of Tony Bouchane and myself and Don Helmbrecht just provided some technical support along the way. And actually, Tobin Smale from the fuels team gave us some assistance with the total fuels change tool. So it was a real group effort here. LANDFIRE has a number of tools that can help you adjust its data. The first one listed here is a guidebook called Modifying LANDFIRE Geospatial Data for Local Applications. That's something that Don Helmbrecht and I worked on, and it's a guidebook that walks you through the process of modifying data. And it's good if you're interested in modifying the data, of course, that's what it was designed to do, but it gives a really good introduction to each of LANDFIRE's products. So if you just need information on the products themselves and kind of help understanding what they are and what they represent, there's a lot of background information on that in this guide. So that's a good resource that you can find online. Sawtooth Fuels Update Tutorial, that's what I just went through. I called it Sawtooth because Tony was working on the Sawtooth. It probably should be South Central Idaho Fuels Model Update Tutorial. LANDFIRE has a YouTube channel, and on that channel we have a lot of different tutorials that help give you information about modifying LANDFIRE data, some basic raster analysis steps that are pretty useful. And then of course there's the LANDFIRE Total Fuel Change Tool, which is available online. Okay, some closing thoughts to wrap it up here. One is that all data should be reviewed to ensure that it's suitable for your application. LANDFIRE data really aren't special. It's just what we happen to be talking about today. So we encourage folks to review and adjust their data sets and provide time for that because it does take time. Second, understanding your needs is really critical, and that seems sort of simple, but it can be more difficult than it sounds. You want to have really clear objectives, and that helps you determine what kind of changes you need to make and perhaps what kind of changes you don't need to make. Again, it takes time, so you need to be clear about what it is that you really need so you don't waste a lot of time. Finally, identify and engage local experts when you're doing data review and modification. I like to think of data review and modification as a team sport, and I think that the Idaho example really illustrates that. We had Tony Bouchane, who did the update for the Sawtooth, and he was working with the fuels planner in the area, Ian Rickert. They knew a lot about the fire behavior and were able to make those local calibrations. Don Helmbrecht and I helped with some of the technical aspects of the GIS and the LANDFIRE data, and we used Tobin Smale to help run the change tool. So again, a real team effort there, and I think that's the case with a lot of this information. You've got information about ecology as well as some technical skills that are needed to make the data modifications, and you don't often find that all in one person, so gather a team together. If you do review LANDFIRE data, we really encourage you to provide feedback. There are a number of ways you can do that. You can contact our help desk. Again, I'm going to provide all these links at the end. There were just too many to provide in the presentation itself. We have a product review website, and that is for providing feedback on the spatial data products. And we also have a biophysical settings review website if you're interested in biophysical settings models. I didn't really talk about that today, so if you have questions, you can ask me about that here in just a couple of minutes when we get to the Q&A. This is my contact information. You can always contact me, and I also put the LANDFIRE help desk contact up there. And this is these are some ways you can connect with LANDFIRE online. Landfire.gov is a really great source of information about all the products and accessing the data. The Nature Conservancy's LANDFIRE team maintains a site on the Nature Conservancy's Conservation Gateway. We have a lot of good information about the application of the data. We're on Twitter and YouTube. You can opt into the postcard and bulletins, and you can email landfire@tnc.org if you have any questions. And I think, so Kori Guker has put in the chat window a URL to the Northern Rockies Fire Science Exchange website where all of the links that I mentioned today are shown, and I'm going to see if I can switch over there now. Okay, so this is the Northern Rockies Fire Science Exchange Network site, and if you go to this particular webinar and scroll down, you'll see all these resources. So there's the Modifying Data Guide, the Sawtooth Fuels Update Tutorial, a link to the YouTube, Total Fuels Change Tool, Help Desk, etc. So a lot of great information there. I am going to see if I can bounce back now to the PowerPoint. This is where I ran into trouble last time. There we go. Okay, and I'd be happy to answer questions. And again, we do have Tobin Smale and Charlie Martin to help answer some of the technical fuels and total fuel change tool questions.
Thank you, Kori. I am going to unmute all of the attendees. It's a pretty small group, so I think this should work fine. If everyone's clamoring to answer questions, though, let's see, it's not letting me. Oh, here, I have to do it individually. If you find that your question is not being answered, it might be because I was not able to unmute you, or it could be that you're not getting in because everyone else is talking. So we can do the hand raise if it starts to be cumbersome, but I think we'll just open it up and see what questions we have and see how it goes without the hand raising first.
Hi there.
Hello. We can hear you.
Okay, good. My name is Carrie Newman. I am a geospatial fire analyst on the San Juan National Forest in Colorado. I'm also a long-term fire analyst, and I've got a couple of questions. First one is, what's the latest version of total change fuel, or really what the question is, what's the latest version of ArcMap that the current version will work with?
Muted. Oh, there we go. Great. I was muted for a second. Now I'm unmuted. I'm going to punt that one to Tobin. Can you answer that, Tobin? There might be some trouble with muting, but I know I'm running 10.2.1 and it works on that version. I don't know if there's one for 10.3, so maybe Tobin will be able to type into the chat if he can't speak.
Kori, can you hear me? This is Charlie.
Oh, great. Yeah, yep.
Yeah, it was fine. I run it on 10.3, ARC 10.3. They experimented with it down in Southern California on ARC 10.5. So for all the 10 series, it should be good to go that I know of right now. I think the only ones having a problem with it are you guys at TNC.
Yeah, that's right. We've had a little problem with the current version, but I am able to run an older version on 10.2. But I think that's a personal problem, not a change tool problem.
So, Carrie, have you taken, we put on, it's been a few years now, but we put on a few sessions on the use of the total fuel change tool. Were you in one of those courses, or have you kind of taught yourself how to use it?
Well, I'm still pretty new at it, Charlie. I haven't actually used it myself, but we have done some work with Don Helmbrecht and Jessica Haas here and doing some calibration, and that leads to my second question, because we've developed what we think are some pretty good calibration rules that we can implement using total fuel change for a large landscape that we can run in FSIM. I can't, there isn't a way to take those rules into the landscape editor in WFDS because of the limitations in WFDS with the complexity of shapefiles. I'm wondering if anybody's got any suggestions on, well, even for the sawtooth example, how they were able to implement those rules in WFDS, because you can't import a landscape into WFDS.
Right, and that's always been the problem with WFDS, is you can't bring in your edited landscape files. Actually, there was talk when IBM was still over there at WFDS. I haven't been in touch with them lately, but you know, in the off season, if you have created a landscape, there was talk that, you know, they were going to try and make some of them available, but you know, if everybody's got their own landscape, then they're going to have all those radio buttons all over the place for each one of those landscapes. So it's a problem. What we suggested to them was, why don't they, just incorporate most of the basic tool use from LANDFIRE total fuel change tool. In other words, pretty much put the tool in there as the editor. They were beating that question around, and I don't know where that ever went to.
Yeah, at least if they could even include existing vegetation type and height and cover, that would help. But yeah, I don't think they're moving forward, not with the new contractor.
Yeah, with regards to the Grape Fire example that I gave, where the LTAN used the calibrated rule sets, that was information that I got from Ian Rickert, who's the fire planner for that particular area. And he said they use the calibrated rule set. So I'm guessing maybe, again, that he looked at those rules and made adjustments within WFDS, perhaps. I'm not sure, but we could contact Ian for more information, Carrie, if you would like.
Well, I suspect if his landscape was small enough that he was able, he may have been able to upload some masks for EVT cover and height and use those as editor rules within those masks. But if those shapes are too complex and your landscape is too large, they won't work in WFDS. So that's about the only workaround I've been able to find.
Okay.
Do we have any more questions out there? If you're not able to speak them, go ahead and type them in the chat and I'll be sure to relay them. I had a question, Gori. Oops, go ahead, sorry.
This is Kathy Roach, and I'd just like to know, is this being used in land management planning for any of the new plans that are coming online?
Under the new planning rule?
Yeah.
This type of data modification?
Right.
Is that what you mean? Yeah, okay. I believe so, and Don Helmbrecht is someone who's been involved in some of the updates. Specifically, I'm thinking of some work he's done in California where they're updating under the new planning rule, and he, I think it's a fire risk analysis that he does, and as part of that, he uses LANDFIRE data because it's wall-to-wall, but then he updates it. And the way he generally does it is by gathering a group of experts together in a workshop setting and editing the fuels rules. So that's one example I am aware of, and there may be others around the country, but I don't have any other examples.
Okay, thank you.
Can I add to that? This is Carrie again. It hasn't been approved yet, but there is a tech guide out there now in draft that's being reviewed for final on incorporating fire management considerations into land management planning. This is a Forest Service document which really suggests using this risk assessment framework process for all future land management plan revisions, which is exactly what they're doing in California. So I would hope that we can expect to see the risk assessment process and the associated landscape calibrations to become more and more common.
Do you know where in California they're using it? Is it the early adopter forests, or is it the next round?
Well, it started initially with the 3 forests in the southern Sierras there. I can't remember offhand.
They were kind
to
of making
be,
early adopters, and
right.
yeah, okay.
And they're kind of proof of concept at this point, and they're moving ahead as a region with the whole risk assessment and incorporating that into the LMP assessment. And they're doing their thing in California, which is kind of what the tech guide is recommending, but the tech guide is not as prescriptive as what they're doing in California, but it's being adopted by all the forests in California.
Yeah, I was going to say, if I remember right, I think Don worked with the Southern California forest, that group of forests, but I think also they've got a group on the northern Sierra that he's worked with as well. Kathy, I probably have a couple contacts for you that could be helpful. If you want, feel free to send me an email after this and I can provide those contacts.
Okay, I probably have the same ones. I retired from the Shasta Trinity in June of last year, and I'm just trying to keep up on what's happening.
Okay, all right, great.
But I'll let you know if I need more information. Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Any more questions? You know, I was wondering, Kori, how often do you guys do something like you did with the sawtooth and help in that capacity?
Yeah, it varies. I have, you know, probably on an annual basis, just a handful of folks that'll come to me with a specific project and we'll work with them. But really, it's an open offer. The Nature Conservancy's LANDFIRE team, our role is really to help people use the data, and we'll go to great lengths to do that. So this work with Tony, you know, that was hours probably of my time. It was the first time I had done it, so there's a little bit more of a learning curve. It'll be easier the next time. But another example is that we had a fellow in the North Carolina National Forest who they were going through plan revision, and as part of that, they wanted to establish the historical range of variability for their vegetation types. We took LANDFIRE models, we locally calibrated them, and then we set them up in a special way to run historical range of variability to get that result. Normally, LANDFIRE models for kind of a mean or an average condition, but we actually wanted to look at that variability. And so we set the models up that way. And again, you know, I spent hours doing this, and it was really interesting for me. Lately, I've been working with the Nature Conservancy and the Forest Service in Region 6, the ecology program there. They're doing a broad-scale assessment looking at fire severity historically across the Northwest. So really, I mean, it does kind of depend, but I've worked with a handful of projects over the years, as well as other members of the Nature Conservancy's LANDFIRE team. And we really enjoy it. For me, you know, it's where the rubber meets the road. So, you know, we're not just creating data to create data. We're creating data hopefully to be useful. And sometimes to be useful, we need to provide some technical support. So we recognize that, and we do our best to provide it. So all the, you know, links that you see here are to, you know, hopefully get you that support. But, you know, emailing the help desk, LANDFIRE's help desk, well, usually that's going to get you to a real person in the end who can help either, you know, with maybe some smaller technical questions or just sort of larger analyses if you need help with them.
To add to that, Kori, currently in the Southern California area, Phil Bowden, who used to be the field specialist for the region over there, he's retired now, but he's working with a lady from TNC on a rather large project. Tobin and I have been communicating back and forth with them. So these little get-togethers are happening quite frequently, and of course Don is on the road and Joe Scott is on the road quite a bit of the time doing these kinds of calibrations.
Yeah, it's true. John Helbrecht and Joe Scott, they're sort of like adjunct LANDFIRE members.
Anybody else have any burning questions? Well, I'm not seeing anything in the chat, so, and it's been nearly an hour. Feel free to interrupt this conclusion if you have something comes up. But I just want to thank everyone who was in attendance, and also for the team, Kori, Jeannie, Tobin, and Charlie, thanks so much. I think this has been a really valuable session, and it looks like there's help available in the future for any of you. Thanks again. Thank you, Kori. Great presentation, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.